Hey, Miles here at Tactile Hyve, and today in this video I have a special guest, Rob Hyve from CCW Safe. If you follow us on Instagram and even Facebook, we release a lot of videos and give a lowdown and insights into real-life confrontations. And we teach how to prevent things from happening and how to handle yourself in those situations, but that's the first fight. Rob is an expert also at what happens on the second fight, the legal fight. So if you're interested to hear what Rob has to say, stay tuned. Welcome back. So as I mentioned, we have Rob from CCW Safe, and he's a use of force expert, and he's here to give his insights into a lot of real-life confrontations. And before we dive into some real-life footage, Rob, could you give our viewers a little bit of a background?
I grew up, I was a wrestler in school growing up. After getting out of school, a couple years down the road, I became a wrestling coach. So I've been involved with combat sports of one form or fashion for 53 years now. I've actively competed wrestling and judo internationally. And in 1995, I became a police officer with the Oklahoma City Police Department. Through my career, I worked patrol, I worked a street level narcotics unit. I spent a great deal of time as a gang investigator. I always wanted to go after bad guys and not just be a traffic cop or something like that. So even when I moved into investigations, I always worked violent crimes. I didn't work property crimes. Mm-hmm. So that became something that was near and dear to me. For 10 years, almost 10 years, I ran the police academy. So I taught recruits. During that time, I was also the defensive tactics coordinator for the department and the subject matter expert. So I gained a ton of experience there, especially as far as the legal aspects and courtroom aspects. Mm-hmm. So it's just been a part of my life for the last 30 years and something I have a great deal of passion about.
Awesome. Thanks for the background, Rob. And as I mentioned, Rob's here specifically because we always talk about the actual confrontation at hand. But as we know, there's that second fight, the legal fight. Whenever we post videos of real-life confrontations, we'll always hear people at 50%, oh, it's justified, 50% no. And so we thought it would be a great idea to have Rob really give you what the lowdown really is. And there's a specific incident that happened a few weeks ago in Houston that made the rounds on the web, and we posted this on our Instagram channel. A lot of people really were divided again, where we have somebody who went into a restaurant and went in to rob the customers, and then we had a concealed carrier open fire, put down the threat, and this is where it kind of gets a little crazy, where people are talking about, okay, this was an overkill, it did too much. So we also had some people going, the original shooting may not have been justified. So what is your take? I would say, let's break it down into two things. Okay. Initially, when he first opened fire, and then the second part, which you can discuss later, was like after the threat was down. An
armed robbery is extremely violent. The guy has what appears to be, at least, the opportunity and ability for lethal violence. He's coming in, he's brandishing a firearm, he's sticking it in people's face, he's taking their stuff, and he makes his rounds, and after he finishes that, he starts to exit, and as he exits, you see the guy, the concealed carrier, he actually does a really good job of kind of concealing his draw stroke. He remains under the table, and then he very aggressively punches out, engages the target, and starts shooting. And you get people that get really wound up about this because, well, he shot him in the back. That's not that big a deal, really. That threat is still there and it's still not gone. It's still a present danger for everybody in the store. But he engages him hard and fast and puts him down.
Yes.
And if you really pay attention to the video, you can see the gun skitter away, but the shooting doesn't stop.
Got it. Yeah, and that kind of segues into the second
All of a sudden, now we're shifting gears and we're opening up things that are going to have to be looked at by investigators and prosecutors. It's going to be a tough road for defense counsel in something like that if charges are filed. And the question I have as an investigator is the fact that the action by the concealed carrier doesn't stop then. He continues to engage. He actually gets out of his booth, moves towards the guy, and he's still firing. And we know that we've already seen the gun go away. And it's almost like he goes and finishes with that little coup de grace.
Yeah.
And we see him walking back to his table with the bad guy's gun in his other hand.
That's definitely something I want to discuss. As we talked about, there's a lot of people talking about that second part, if we want to call it that. Going back to the first part, though, because as you mentioned too, they've got the robber had his back turned, and then we had the concealed carrier take that shot. Even though, so listening to Rob, what Rob just mentioned, you know, he was still an imminent threat, but yet, you know, there's a lot of people on the internet going, oh, his back is turned, his back is turned, his back is turned. No, it's not justified. So I'm playing, let's say, devil's advocate, or more just kind of somebody who's not experienced, well, I'm not experienced a lot in the second fight. So does that depend on state as well? Are there any variables that one would have to consider? Because based on your explanation, and this is your experience, you're saying that if the person has his back turned to you, still an imminent threat, it's still, you're still justified, so to speak. But could that also depend on state? I'm not really sure. In your experience, do you have?
You know, it can. It sure can. You know, Texas has a law in the book still that you can shoot somebody for theft if it's after dark. Mm-hmm. Personally, I have a moral standard that I hold myself to. It has to be a lethal threat for me to engage something with a lethal response. It's one of those that, you know, had the guy sat back and just let the guy leave, are they okay?
Yeah.
Odds are they probably are. I mean, the guy looked like he was headed for the exit.
Just wanted some money and, yeah.
But you still had clear and present danger. You had an armed guy that has already not just threatened criminal activity, he's played it out.
Yeah, he's pointed that gun at people. Yeah.
He's pointed the gun at people. He has absolutely taken properties from people already. He's robbed people at gunpoint. So we know his intent's there. But there's so many variables that come into this. You know, we get phone calls every time something like this comes up. We have members from CCW Safe, they're calling, you know, hey, what about this? And we get emails and all kinds of stuff. Is this guy okay? It looks okay to me. Well, there's things about it that look okay to a point. And then all of a sudden we get there and you've got a bad guy that's down. We know that he's disarmed. You can see the gun kind of skitter away to his left. He's face down. He's not moving. From personal experience, one of the ones that I remember is we had a very similar kind of action. A pharmacist has two guys come in. They're coming in at gunpoint. He goes to the register, pulls a gun, engages them. One of them takes off running. He runs out the door. He engages them inside the store. One of them goes down, runs outside, and starts firing rounds down the road as the guy's fleeing. And my issue with that is, does he have the wherewithal to pay attention to the surroundings? Is it a safe backdrop where he's shooting towards and that kind of thing? Yeah. But he goes back in to the pharmacy and he goes to the register again and he comes out with a different gun and walks over to where the guy is already grounded and finishes him right there on the floor. He's locked up for years and years and years on a killing. And it was the simple fact, if he'd have never fired another round, he'd have been fine with that shooting right there. What put him away was the fact that he came back and he engaged a person that was no longer a threat. And that's the biggest deal. As long as everybody else is safe, you're finished. Yep. We're done. It's just like.
And it makes a lot of sense. And so it really is the scenario that we see in Houston as well. And it's interesting that even in the comments, you know, there people are saying that, no, that's justified. Or they're talking about, now granted, viewers, I don't know, I was just basing this off of comments that were left on our social media channels. So, people reporting that the cops had already found the shooter and interviewed him and let him go. But, you know, I was talking to Rob, that doesn't necessarily mean he's off. You know, it just means that, okay, interviewed him, got some facts, and then later on, it could lead to some trouble, as you mentioned, yeah.
Well, and another thing, a lot of people don't understand this. As an investigator, I put a case together and I go to a prosecutor with a case file and we present the case, we discuss the case. Certainly I have a little influence in this, but the decision to charge isn't in my hands. Yeah. A lot of people don't know that. They think, well, the police charged him with this. Well, the police presented all these things to attorneys that are paid by you guys that, you know, our tax dollars are paying for these guys to take care of us. And they sit down and go, we have this, this, and this, and these elements of the crime were met, and yes, we're filing charges. So there's times that I've had prosecutors that I thought the case was solid as a rock, and they just were just like, no, go back to work. I need this, add this. And then there's times that, you know, I work the entire case and I have no earthly idea which direction they're going to go, and they just go, no, we're not taking that to court. So
it's much more dynamic. It's much more complicated.
Yes.
Yes. Then it's interesting because everyone on the internet, it's always black and white. and I do appreciate the insight, and just kind of circling back real quick, because I forgot to close out that first part when the concealed carrier opened fire, even though the threat had his back turned. It's again one of those things often debated. Oh, it's not justified, had his back turned. But for our viewers, for those who heard Rob, that still an imminent threat, and so there could be an argument for, hey, that's a justified shooting. And based on kind of what we were talking about earlier, you had mentioned also, yeah, you don't think there's anything wrong with that initial part. That initial part, like where it was an imminent threat.
Well, there's other things about that that I don't have the ability to kind of look in a crystal ball and see. It's not anything that's shown on the video that we can see, but is there somebody just beyond the doors? Is there other people that are on the sidewalk outside? Is the guy still a threat to other people? And that can always make that more justifiable for him. You know, it gives him a lot more reason for his defense there. It's really different. A lot of times people look at this as just a pure criminal action or criminal defense, you know, and how we're going to have to address this. If his reasoning is the fear of his safety or the safety of others, and, you know, like we talked earlier, I mean, all these elements are in place. The guy's armed, he's sticking this gun in people's faces, he's actively committing felony crimes, and all of a sudden we don't know where he's going from there. It's just one of those things that we don't know that he's finished. We don't know that he's not going to go out and see the guy in the car and say, give me your car.
And that makes perfect sense. And I, again, just trying to drive the point, we've mentioned this also in our captions on social media, where sometimes it's complicated. There's other things. Maybe even if it's straightforward, you know, going to law school, I know sometimes like even in the law, it might seem black and white, yet when it goes to court, it's not necessarily black and white. Something else might come into play, and it changes everything.
Seriously, all I need to do is convince that guy right there that there was something wrong about this. You know, that's all it takes to shake things up. Yes. The other part of this is, like your viewers and our members and the guys that we hear from very frequently, we're humans, and humans are emotional creatures.
Yes.
One of the things I tell people in training all the time, if you decide to carry a gun and you're going to do this on the reg, this is a part of your life now. You have the obligation to train yourself and know how to safely operate this, safely protect this. I also have the obligation to check my emotions at the door. I can't be an emotional creature anymore when I'm carrying a firearm. I'm stepping into a different part of life now. And I don't ever carry a gun to enforce my will on anybody else. I carry a gun to keep somebody from enforcing their will on me. So if it's myself or my family and loved ones, if I walk into an area and something's going down that I can absolutely step in and intervene and maybe save a life, I'm gonna do that. But I'm not a cop anymore. I'm retired. My mission has changed, so I think it's very important. Know your mission. Sometimes the best mission I can provide, and the best part of what I can do in this role, is to be a great witness.
Well, thanks for the insights, Rob. As you can tell, that it's not that easy, and we use that video that's going around of that Houston shooting. Hopefully you found Rob's insights very educational, and this is something that we're going to be doing more and more, because I think it's extremely important. Again, this second fight is very important. You might survive the first, but run into a lot of issues. And I've heard you say this as well as a lot of others from CCW Safe, where you fire that gun, your life can change forever, or it does change forever. Yes, immediately. So stay tuned for more videos in this series where we're going to be bringing Rob in to talk about different situations. And it's important, if you do carry a gun, you do own a gun, make sure you have legal protection. And we work with CCW Safe. We have really been picky with who we decide to work with. And CCW Safe is one of those companies we truly believe in. So if you're not protected, you don't have any protection, or if you do and you're looking for something better, make sure to take a look at the link below and sign up for CCW Safe. You won't be sorry. So thanks again, Rob. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Miles.
All right. Take it easy, guys.